The fog in Carmel by the sea was a living entity, a constant mournful sigh from the Pacific. It crept up the cliffs each afternoon, a soft gray shroud that bled the vibrant greens from the cypress trees and blurred the sharp, unforgiving line of the horizon. For Claire Worthington, it was a physical manifestation of the haze that had occupied her mind for exactly 1 year, since the day the sea had stolen her son, Jacob. Her sprawling coastal estate, a masterpiece of glass and redwood perched on the cliffs, had once been a testament to a life of vibrant control and effortless success. Now its echoing halls and silent, sun-drenched rooms felt like a magnificent mausoleum. The floor-to-ceiling windows no longer offered inspiration. They presented a taunting, panoramic view of the enemy, a constant shimmering reminder of the sailing accident that had ripped her only child from the world. In this silent, cavernous existence, Donovan Reed was her anchor. Her husband of 2 years, younger than her by a decade with a face that was still boyishly handsome, had become the architect of her fragile survival. He moved through the grand house with a quiet, unobtrusive competence, his presence a low, steady hum against the screaming silence of her grief. He was the one who fielded the endless, pitying calls from well-meaning friends she couldn't bear to speak to. He was the one who now sat in on meetings with the Worthington portfolio managers, his brow furrowed with a seriousness that she found both touching and a relief. He was the one who appeared at her bedside with chamomile tea when the first light of dawn felt not like a promise, but a threat. "I'm here, Claire," he would murmur, his hand a warm, firm weight on her shoulder, a physical tether to a world she was drifting away from. "You don't have to worry about a thing, just focus on healing." And she was grateful. The gratitude was a profound, aching thing, one of the few strong emotions that could still pierce the fog. When she'd met Donovan at a Monterey Bay Aquarium gala, she'd been a widow for years, powerful, self-sufficient, and content in her solitude. He was a charismatic art dealer with more charm than capital, but he'd pursued her with a sincerity that seemed utterly unfazed by her fortune or her age. After their whirlwind marriage, he and a then 16-year-old Jacob had forged an easy, joshing friendship that had filled the house with laughter and warmed Claire's heart. When Jacob was gone, that warmth had been extinguished, and Donovan's strength was all that kept her from shattering into a million irreparable pieces. He curated her life now, a gentle but firm gatekeeper, shielding her from painful memories, overwhelming logistics, and the crushing weight of a life she no longer felt capable of steering. He was her rock, the steadfast lighthouse against the internal storm. She leaned on him, depended on him, and trusted him with the broken shards of her world. In the fragile peace he had so carefully constructed around her, she existed in a state of suspended animation, too numb to live, too cared for to die. The vibrant, decisive woman who ran a philanthropic foundation and could command a boardroom with a single look was gone, replaced by this quiet, fragile creature. The world outside her fog-wrapped estate had ceased to matter. Donovan was her world now. The first crack in her curated reality was as faint as a spider's thread. Claire was drifting through the grand music room, a space she usually avoided. Her fingers, thin and pale, ghosted over the closed, dust-filmed lid of the Steinway. And then she heard it. 3 simple, ethereal notes, a fragment of the Chopin nocturne Jacob had been wrestling with for months, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sound was faint, tinny, and seemed to emanate from the antique Swiss music box perched on the mantelpiece. It had been a gift from her first husband, and its intricate mechanism had been broken for the better part of a decade. Her heart, a sluggish and heavy thing in her chest, gave a painful lurch. "Jacob?" The name was a breath, a ghost of a sound in the oppressive stillness. The melody was gone as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the distant moan of the foghorn in its wake. She physically shook her head, trying to dislodge the absurdity. When she mentioned it to Donovan that evening as he placed a bowl of soup in front of her, he stopped, his expression melting into one of deep, tender sympathy. He came around the table and wrapped her in a hug, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Oh, my love," he said, his voice a balm of reason. "You know how this old house settles and creaks. The wind from the sea can make the most unusual sounds. They call it auditory pareidolia, the mind-hearing patterns where there are none. You loved hearing him play so much. It's only natural your heart would want to hear it again." He was so kind, so rational, that a hot flush of shame crept up her neck. Of course, it was grief. It was the wind. It was anything but what her heart had leapt to believe. A week later, the whispers grew bolder. She was standing by the great window in the living room, watching the evening mist creep up from the cliffs and devour the garden. For a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, a figure standing at the edge of the tree line resolved out of the gray. It was tall and slender, with the familiar, slightly slumped posture of a teenager trying to seem casual. The figure wore a dark, hooded sweatshirt, an almost identical twin to the one Jacob had practically lived in. Claire's breath caught in her throat, a sharp, painful gasp. Her hand flew to the cold glass, her mind screaming his name in a silent, desperate prayer. But a blink later, after the frantic pounding of her pulse had subsided, there was nothing. Nothing but a gnarled, twisted cypress branch, its shape cruelly suggestive in the gloom. Donovan came to stand beside her, his presence warm and solid. "What is it, darling?" he asked softly, following her transfixed gaze. When she told him, her voice trembling, what she thought she had seen, he let out a long, slow sigh, a sound of profound and weary sadness. "It's the fog, Claire. It creates shadows, phantoms. You want to see him so desperately that your mind is putting him there for you." He gently steered her away from the window, his logic a soft but firm hand pressing her back down into the fog. He was right. He had to be. The alternative was a terrifying, jagged cliff edge she dared not approach. The assaults on her sanity grew more personal, more intimate. One afternoon, she walked into the master bedroom to find a copy of The Catcher in the Rye, Jacob's dog-eared, much-loved copy, lying open on her bedside table. It was turned to a page he had once read aloud to her, laughing at Holden's cynicism. A corner of the page was folded down, a fresh, sharp crease that had never been there before. Another time, the faint, clean scent of his specific aftershave, a sharp citrus and cedarwood blend she had bought him for his last birthday, wafted through the upstairs hallway. And she followed the scent, her heart a frantic drum, but it vanished as she reached his bedroom door, leaving only the stale, dusty smell of a room left untouched. Each incident was a fresh tear in the fragile fabric of her reality, leaving her more frayed, more unmoored. She was trapped in a torturous limbo, oscillating between a wild, desperate hope that bordered on madness and the cold, clinical fear that she was already there. She stopped mentioning the occurrences to Donovan, unable to bear the pity in his eyes, the gentle, sad way he would look at her, as if she were a precious vase developing an irreparable crack. It was Donovan who finally broke the suffocating silence. He approached her one evening as she sat listlessly by a cold fireplace. He knelt before her, his face a mask of beautifully sculpted worry. "Claire, I'm scared for you," he said, his voice engineered to tremble with just the right amount of emotion. "I feel so helpless. I'm watching you drift away, and I don't know how to bring you back. I think we need help." Before she could muster the energy to protest, he told her he had taken the liberty of calling her best friend of 20 years, Rachel Baker. "She's on her way over from Monterey. She loves you, Claire. She's worried sick." The betrayal was a small, sharp sting. This was her grief, her shame, her potential madness. It felt intensely private, and his sharing it felt like a violation. When Rachel arrived, she was a whirlwind of expensive perfume and perfectly tailored concern. A sharp, successful realtor, Rachel was always impeccably put together, and her polished appearance was a stark, painful contrast to Claire's own neglected state. She enveloped Claire in a tight, airless hug, her voice a theatrical whisper against Claire's hair. "Oh, Claire, Donovan told me you've been having a hard time. I'm so sorry you're going through this." Over tea in the sunroom, the two of them formed a gentle, unassailable front. Donovan, with heartbreaking earnestness, recounted the hallucinations. Rachel would nod, her expression grave, and pat Claire's hand with perfectly manicured fingers. "You know," Rachel said, her voice soft and conspiratorial, "after my father passed, my mother used to see him in the garden all the time. She'd have full conversations with him. The doctors said it's a form of trauma response, the mind trying to protect itself. Every word they spoke was saturated with reason. Every glance was steeped in affection. But to Claire, it felt like the walls of a cage being built around her, bar by loving bar. They were united in their assessment of her fragility. Her own perceptions were dismissed as symptoms. Her reality gently but firmly invalidated by the two people she trusted most. She felt like a child at the adults' table, her fears and experiences reduced to a clinical case study. For the first time, the fog of grief was pierced by the chilling cold of utter isolation. The final decisive push came during a brutal winter storm that raked the coast. Rain lashed against the great panes of glass in horizontal sheets, and the wind howled around the eaves of the house like a hungry wolf, a soundtrack for a descent into madness. The power had flickered twice, casting the vast rooms into momentary, terrifying darkness. Claire, wrapped in a cashmere robe, was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water, her nerves already stretched taut by the storm's fury. As she passed the glass-paned terrace doors, she saw him. This time, it wasn't a trick of the fog or a fleeting scent. A figure stood on the other side of the glass, his silhouette thrown into stark, sudden relief by a brilliant flash of lightning. It was undeniably Jacob. His height, his unruly hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, his slumped posture. He raised a hand, pale and thin, as if to knock on the glass, his face a white, featureless oval in the darkness. A strangled, guttural cry was ripped from Claire's throat. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth as her world tilted and spun on its axis. The sight was too real, too solid, too horrifyingly possible. Donovan rushed in from the study, drawn by her scream. "Claire! What is it?" By the time he reached her side and followed her trembling, pointed finger, the terrace was empty, slick with rain and lashed by the wind. There was no one there. He enveloped her in his arms as she collapsed into body-racking sobs, not of grief, but of sheer, unadulterated terror. "He was there, Donovan! I saw him! He was right there!" she gasped, her words lost in the shuddering of her frame. This time, Donovan didn't offer gentle reassurances or psychological platitudes. He held her, his own body tense, his face a grim portrait of pained defeat. When her sobs subsided into exhausted shudders, he led her to the sofa. "Claire," he said, his voice low and firm, stripped of its usual softness, "this has gone too far. You are torturing yourself, and I can't stand by and watch it happen anymore." The next day, the storm having passed, he and Rachel sat her down in the funereal quiet of the living room. They spoke in hushed, serious tones about her acute psychological distress, her dangerous detachment from reality. Donovan, his face etched with the pain of a man forced to make an impossible choice, presented a brochure. The cover showed serene, sun-dappled gardens and a woman with a blissful smile. The facility, Serenity Meadows, was an exclusive private retreat in the Napa Valley, specializing in grief-related psychosis and trauma. It looked less like a hospital and more like a 5-star resort. "It's not a punishment, my love," he whispered. "It's a sanctuary, a place for you to rest and heal, with people who understand." Rachel, her voice a soothing murmur, added, "We just want our Claire back, the strong, beautiful woman we all love. Jacob would want you to be healthy. He would want you to be happy again." They had an answer for every one of her panicked, feeble objections. Their logic was a cage, beautifully constructed of love and concern, and it was inescapable. Worn down by fear, exhausted by the relentless battle with her own mind, and smothered by their suffocating care, she finally irrevocably broke. A single tear of surrender slipped down her cheek. "Okay," she whispered, the word a death knell to her autonomy, a sound of utter defeat. "I'll go." Relief, profound and immediate, washed over their faces. It looked sickeningly like a victory. The consultation with Serenity Meadows' head psychiatrist was scheduled for Friday morning. On Thursday afternoon, Claire found herself adrift in the house, a ghost in her own life, packing a small suitcase with items one might take to a spa, not a mental institution. The whole process felt surreal, as if she were watching a film about someone else's collapse. The gardener, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, who had worked for her family for 30 years, had left a polite handwritten note on the kitchen counter saying his monthly check was nearly 2 weeks past due. It was a small, mundane detail in the grand, operatic wreckage of her life, but it was a task, a loose thread from her old, competent self that she felt compelled to tie up. A loose Donovan was out, a last-minute meeting with their financial advisor, he'd said with a kiss to her forehead. Just sorting the final details to make sure everything is taken care of while you're resting. She went into his study, a masculine sanctuary of dark wood, leather, and the faint scent of his cologne that she rarely entered. It felt like his territory, and she an intruder. She checked the top drawer of the heavy mahogany desk where she assumed he kept the estate's checkbooks. It wasn't there. A flicker of her old annoyance surfaced. She scanned the room and saw his expensive, oxblood leather briefcase resting on a velvet side chair. Loath to rifle through his personal things, she hesitated, but the thought of Mr. Henderson waiting for his pay spurred her on. With a sigh, she unclasped the twin brass locks and began to search inside. In her haste, her elbow caught the case's edge, sending it tumbling to the floor. Papers, a sleek tablet, pens, and a leather-bound planner spilled across the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. With another sigh of frustration, Claire knelt to clean up the mess. Her fingers, clumsy and slow, gathered the scattered contents. They closed around a small, crumpled piece of thermal paper tucked deep inside the planner's front pocket. She almost dismissed it as trash and tossed it into the wastebasket. But some latent, forgotten instinct, the instinct of the woman who used to review every line item of her foundation's expenses, made her pause. She smoothed the flimsy paper out on her knee. The logo at the top was slightly faded. Hollywood Illusions, Casting and Costuming, with an address in Los Angeles. Her blood, which had been moving so sluggishly through her veins, went instantly cold. Below the logo was an itemized invoice. Date, 3 months prior. Client, D. Reed. The list was short, but it detonated a nuclear bomb in the center of her world. Item 1, teenage male actor, JW likeness spec. 4 scheduled appearances. Item 2, wardrobe rental, distressed hoodie, jeans, specific sneaker model. Item 3, non-disclosure agreement processing fee, rush order surcharge, JW Jacob Worthington. The fog in her mind didn't just lift, it was violently, brutally ripped away. In its place was a landscape of such monstrous, calculated deception that she felt the air leave her lungs in a silent gasp. The music box, the scent of aftershave, the figure in the garden, the face at the window during the storm. It wasn't grief. It wasn't madness. It was a production. A meticulously staged, cruelly executed play designed to fracture her mind and strip her of her credibility. The profound grief that had been her constant companion for a year was instantly vaporized, cauterized by an arctic rage so pure and so potent it felt like a shot of adrenaline to her heart. It scoured away the weakness, the confusion, the sorrow, leaving behind something hard and brilliant and deadly. They thought she was a broken, fragile doll. They had no idea what they had just created. The transformation was seismic, but it was a silent internal earthquake. When Donovan returned home an hour later, radiating warmth and concern, he found a different woman, but his own arrogance blinded him to it. He saw what he expected to see. A fragile Claire, her eyes red-rimmed and vacant, her movements listless. She played her part with a chilling, newfound conviction, a performance born of glacial fury. When he asked how she was feeling, she looked at him, letting her eyes drift out of focus. "You're right," she told him, her voice a convincing, pathetic quaver. "I feel so lost. Everything is so confusing. The appointment tomorrow? It's for the best. I need help." The look of compassionate relief that washed over his handsome face was so perfectly feigned, it was almost admirable. He believed his meticulously crafted plan was entering its final, triumphant phase. He was a master puppeteer, and his puppet was finally dancing to his tune. Claire's mind, now shockingly clear and sharp, worked with a ruthless efficiency she hadn't felt in years. She moved through the house with a new purpose, her grief now a tool rather than a shroud. She remembered a gift she had given Jacob for his 17th birthday. A foolishly expensive piece of tech he'd wanted for his dream of being a music producer. A tiny, Swiss-made audio recorder, no bigger than a domino, famous for its high-fidelity sound capture. She had insisted on the best, a model sensitive enough to pick up the nuance of a guitar string from across a room. After a frantic, silent search of his bedroom, a room she could now enter with cold purpose instead of crippling sorrow, She found it in the back of his desk drawer, still in its velvet-lined box. She retreated to the vast master bathroom, her private sanctuary, and spent an hour familiarizing herself with its simple one-touch operation, charging it via a hidden USB port inside her vanity. The trap was ready to be set. That evening, Donovan informed her that Rachel was coming over for dinner. "Just to give you some moral support before tomorrow," he'd said, stroking her hair. "We're a team. We'll get you through this." It was perfect. The two architects of her destruction, together in one place. As they were finishing their meal, a meal Claire could barely taste past the metallic tang of her rage, she executed her plan. She stood up from the dining table, swayed dramatically, and pressed a hand to her forehead. I feel a bit dizzy," she murmured, her voice faint. "The stress, I think. I just need to lie down for a while." Donovan and Rachel leapt to their feet, their faces masks of alarm. "Of course, darling," Donovan cooed, rushing to her side. "Let me help you. Rachel and I will clean up." Claire allowed him to guide her from the dining room, leaning on him with the full weight of her feigned weakness. As they passed the grand, dimly lit library, she stumbled again, this time lurching against a large, ornate bookshelf filled with her late husband's collection of leather-bound classics. "So sorry, so clumsy," she whispered as she braced herself against the shelves. In that one fluid, seemingly accidental motion, her hand dipped behind a thick row of Dickens, depositing the tiny, activated recorder. She had seen them take their post-dinner brandies in the library 100 times. It was their war room. She allowed Donovan to help her up the stairs, her heart hammering not with fear or anxiety, but with the thrilling, predatory calm of a hunter lying in wait for her prey. The next morning dawned gray and blustery, the sky a perfect mirror of the grim performance about to unfold. The chosen stage was the formal living room, a vast, impersonal space Claire had always disliked, with its museum-like furniture and a wall of glass overlooking the churning, slate-colored Pacific. She sat on a cream-colored sofa, deliberately making herself look small and lost in its opulent expanse, her hands clasped nervously in her lap. She was a study in feminine fragility, dressed in pale, flowing silks that made her look ethereal and breakable. Donovan and Rachel flanked her, two vultures disguised as guardian angels, their faces composed in expressions of solemn, loving gravity. Their performance was flawless, a masterclass in manipulative theater. Donovan, handsome and grave in a dark cashmere sweater that highlighted his compassionate eyes, knelt before her. He took her cold hands in his warm ones, his grip firm and reassuring. "My darling Claire," he began, his voice a low, resonant thrum of practiced sorrow. "This is without a doubt the hardest thing I have ever had to do. But I cannot stand by and watch you fade away into this confusion. I'm not losing you. I'm doing this to get my wife back, the vibrant, brilliant woman I fell so deeply in love with." Every word was a polished lie, delivered with the conviction of a true believer. Rachel, dabbing at a perfectly dry eye with a corner of a silk handkerchief, sat beside Claire and put a heavy, comforting arm around her shoulders. "He's right, Claire. We love you so much. We've exhausted every other option. Think of what Jacob would want. He adored you. He would want his mother to be healthy, to be happy again." She slid a glossy, heavy-stock brochure onto the coffee table. The cover read, "Serenity Meadows, Your Journey Back to You." "Doctor, Albright is the best in the country for this sort of thing. This place, it's a sanctuary, not a prison. It's a chance for you to heal." They spoke in tandem, their voices interwoven in a symphony of loving gaslighting. They recounted her episodes, her detachment from reality, her frightening hallucinations, framing them as symptoms of a disease that, if left untreated, would consume her entirely. Claire listened, her expression placid, her mind a block of Arctic ice. She let them talk, let them spin their intricate web of lies and concern around her, until the air in the room was thick and suffocating with it. She was no longer a participant in this drama, but a spectator, watching two actors play their parts with chilling dedication. She observed every false note of sympathy, every calculated glance of concern, cataloging them in her memory. Finally, having exhausted their script, Donovan rose to his feet, a look of grim, noble resolve on his face. He picked up his phone from the heavy oak table. "The doctors are on standby, Claire. They're ready to come as soon as I call. It's time. We're doing this because we love you." He held her gaze, the perfect tragic picture of a devoted, heartbroken husband, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice for her well-being. The silence that followed was charged with his absolute, unshakable triumph. Claire let the moments stretch, allowing them to savor the sweet taste of their victory. She watched the pity and self-congratulatory resolve settle on their faces. Then, she lifted her head. The vacant, broken woman they had so carefully constructed over the past year vanished in an instant. Her spine straightened. The fog in her eyes evaporated, revealing a gaze that was sharp and hard as shattered glass. "Don't bother," she said. Her voice was not the weak, reedy whisper they were accustomed to. It was clear, cold, and resonated with a chilling, unfamiliar authority that made them both flinch. Before either of them could process the shocking transformation, she pulled her own phone from the deep pocket of her silk robe. Her thumb, steady and deliberate, moved across the screen, a gesture of effortless command. "There's a conversation from last night. I think you should both hear first." She tapped the screen, connecting to the room's state-of-the-art Sonos sound system, a lavish anniversary gift from Donovan. After a soft chime, the system crackled to life. The audio quality was impeccable, the acoustics of the wood-paneled library having captured every damning syllable with perfect clarity. Donovan's smug, triumphant voice filled the vast living room. She completely bought it. The dizzy spell in the library was the final crack. She'll be certified and competent by lunchtime tomorrow. A pause, then Rachel's laugh, a sound stripped of all its practiced warmth, sharp and ugly and greedy. "That actor was worth every penny, Dawn. God, her face when she saw him at the window. I thought she was going to have a heart attack. Once she's committed, getting the power of attorney declared permanent will be a formality. Carmel, the stocks, the foundation, it's all ours." The recording continued, an audio nightmare of their meticulous betrayal. "To us, Rachel," Donovan's voice said, followed by the distinct, cheerful clink of brandy glasses. Donovan's voice. "And to poor, crazy Claire, may she rest in peace, in Napa." The sound of his own name for her, poor, crazy Claire, echoed in the sudden, oppressive silence of the living room. The color drained from Donovan's handsome face, replaced by a ghastly mottled white. He looked as if he'd been physically struck. Rachel stared at the invisible speakers on the wall, as if they had sprung teeth and were about to devour her, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream of disbelief. Pure, unadulterated horror dawned in their eyes as they turned from the speakers and looked at Claire, really looked at her, and finally understood. The hunter had become the hunted. The trap had never been for her. She sat there, a silent, avenging queen on her throne, her expression as calm and implacable as the cliffs outside. She watched, with a cold, clean satisfaction, as their meticulously constructed world shattered into a million irreparable pieces around them. The fog, at last, was gone.